Hi, and welcome to Week 2, Lecture 1 of Real Estate Law. Your homework for this past week was to read Chapter 1 from your Real Estate Law book, and this chapter is on an introduction to the law of real property. And if you're like most of my students, you may have read this chapter and felt a little bit overwhelmed. That's not unusual. I think that the chapter is full of a lot of information, and a lot of it you may be unfamiliar with. So this may be the first time that you're hearing a lot of these words. Adverse possession and fee simple and future interests and condition subsequent. There's a lot of stuff that may be overwhelming if you've never heard of it before. I hope to be able to make it a lot more easy to understand, a lot more manageable. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't panic. I think I can break it down for you in a way that you're going to be a lot more comfortable. My plan is to break this week's lecture down into 3 or 4 short videos covering each of the major topics from the chapter, so that I'm not making an hour-long video lecture that you have to sit and watch. I want to break it down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Okay, so, and again, if you're having trouble with Blackboard or you're finding it hard to access these videos, don't panic, or any of the content. Don't panic. When I get back, we will get it figured out. Okay, so the chapter starts out with a discussion on the differences between real property and personal property. And I'm typing it out like this because I'm used to having a whiteboard, and I would normally put all this stuff up on the whiteboard for you, but since it's a video, I have this is the way I'll do it. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know from this chapter about the difference between real property and personal property is that with real property, the law governing how real property is handled is made by the states, or comes from the states. And from the state's common law. In other words, it's not federal law. It's not law made at the national level. It's law made at the state level. So, just as a reminder, I'm sure you remember that we get our laws in 2 different ways. First, we get statutes, which are written by the legislature. And second is common law, which we get from the courts. So the way this works is, for example, you might have a statute that says I'll give you an example from criminal law. It'll say it's a crime to assault someone. Okay, so that's what the legislature writes. Now, when it goes to court, a judge is going to define the word assault, and that becomes the common law. So the judge might say, well, an assault is anytime you make a threat against a person. So that's the way statutes and common law work together to create the state's law. And that happens on the federal level as well, with the Congress and the Supreme Court. But for real property, the laws governing real property come from the state level. Okay. Meanwhile, Personal property, the laws governing personal property can come from the state level or the federal level. So again, it can be statutes or common law from the state or the federal level. Okay. Another difference between real property and personal property, well, is the definition. A real property is land and anything attached to it, whether it's on the land, under the land, or above the land. Personal property, on the other hand, is anything that's not real property. So, personal property can be, it's usually movable. So things like a car or a pen or a computer or a phone. Personal property is usually movable. It can be tangible or intangible. Now, tangible, of course, means able to be touched. Intangible means not able to be touched. So this is kind of a complicated concept that gives some people a little bit of pause to the thought of intangible personal property. An example of an intangible personal property is the right to sue somebody. Another example of intangible personal property is stocks, bonds, patents. These are all, even though stocks, bonds, and patents all have a piece of paper that you can hold that proves that you own the stock, bond, or patent, it's actually something that it has no physical existence. You can hold the piece of paper, but that piece of paper is really just a piece of paper. It's not, the paper itself doesn't have the value. What the piece of paper represents is what has the value, and that is an intangible thing that you can't hold or touch. So intangible personal property is a kind of complicated concept, and I hope to do a little activity with you that will help you to understand the difference of it. But it's not a real huge priority for us in this class because we're going to be focusing on real property. But this comes up in this chapter because they want you to see the difference between real property and personal property. And one of the types of personal property is this thing called intangible personal property. So it's kind of complicated, but don't get hung up on it because it's not the most important thing for us to focus on. And we're going to do a little activity. I hope to do a little activity with you that will help you understand what it means. Okay, so we talked about where the laws come from. Oh, I need to back up for a step and talk about the real property. The law governing real property comes from the states and the state's common law, but it's specifically the state in which the property is located. So if you are going to sue somebody over a piece of land, you're going to sue them in the same state that that land is located. Now, with personal property, say somebody damages your vehicle, and maybe they live in Maryland and you live in Virginia. You're going to sue, where you sue them depends on where the where the injury happened or where somebody lives. But with real property, with real estate, you're going to sue them in the state where the property is located. So, for example, Michigan is going to have a different rules and different laws about real property than Virginia would have. So it is Michigan's law that's going to control what happens with real property in Michigan. So, okay, I hope that's clear. Now, one last thing that we need to talk about when we're discussing classification of property and real property versus personal property is the idea of fixtures. Now, fixtures are items that normally would be personal property, but something has happened to make it treated as real property. Now, an example of this would be a dishwasher. A dishwasher starts out as personal property. It's movable, it's tangible, it's not land or anything on, under, or above the land. So normally it would be classified as personal property. But something happens to make it be treated as real property. And what happened is it was attached, or, let's see, adapted. I'm sorry, I'm going to take away the word attached because your book uses the word annexed. Annexation, which means attached. Adaption, or intent. So 3 things a judge looks at to determine if something is a fixture or not. Okay, annexation, adaption, and intention. So annexation means attachment. And in the example of the dishwasher, it started out as personal property. You went to the store and bought it. You brought it home and you installed it. You attached it to your house. When you attached it to your house, you made it a part of the house, and it will be treated as real property now. So another example of something that could start out as personal property but become real property is built-in bookshelves. You took something, you bought it at the store, you moved it to the property, and then you somehow adapted the building and the personal property to fit together, and your intention was to make it a part of the house, to be a built-in bookshelf. And the bookshelf and the house itself were adapted. That means they were changed so that they would work together. And so now that bookshelf would be treated as real property. So the importance of this is that when you go to sell your house, the person who's buying the house is expecting that certain things in the house are going to stay there. Wouldn't it be awful if you went to buy a house and you got there and the previous owners had taken out all the cupboards and the dishwasher and the stove and ripped up all the carpet and took it with them? Well, now you expect that they're taking their furniture with them. You wouldn't expect to buy a house, walk in, and all their furniture is still there. When you bought the house, you didn't expect to be buying the furniture too, unless that was part of the sales contract. But normally, most people would not assume that they're going to get the furniture too. But the carpet, the cupboards, the stairs, anything built in outside a shed that is built into the land, or built onto the land, a shed somebody would expect would be part of the sale. So a fixture is anything that started out as personal property, and because it was attached or adapted, or it was the intention of the person who put it there to make it a part of the real property, then it's treated as real property when it comes by the courts. It would be treated as real property. So, okay, we've covered real property, personal property, and fixtures. There are some gray areas. For example, I said that real property is the land and anything attached to it, whether on, under, or above the land. So you might think, what about something that's growing on the land? It's easy to see that a house or a building or a well is attached to the land. But what about something that's growing on the land? Well, in that case, when we're talking about things that are growing on the land, it can be personal property if the purpose of the growing of it is for sale. So if it's like crops, corn growing on the land, or if it's a tree farm and, you know, it's a Christmas tree farm. So in that case, the Christmas trees would count as personal property because everybody knows going into it that these are going to be removed from the land and taken away. So things growing on the land that are meant to be removed. Okay. Anyways, that's kind of a mess, but I hope that you're able to understand it. So, real property is land, anything growing or anything attached to the land, like a building or a well. Most trees and shrubs would be considered real property. For instance, an oak tree. That's not meant to be removed and taken somewhere else to be sold. So most things that are growing on the land are counted as real property. Some things that are growing on the land are counted as personal property, and that would include things that were going to be removed to sell, like corn growing on the land, or wheat, or Christmas trees. Okay. So those things are considered personal property. Now, let's see. Let's underline that and get nice and fancy here. So real property, the law governing real property comes from the state in which the property is located. Where we get these laws are statutes from the legislature, common law from the courts. Personal property is pretty much anything that's not real property. It's movable. It can be tangible or intangible. An example of intangible personal property is the right to sue somebody. Stocks, bonds, patents, all these are intangible. Also, I didn't mention before, but personal property can be living things as well as inanimate objects. Inanimate objects. So, pets, basically, or livestock. So, personal property can be living things as well. Okay, so where are we? Personal property, the laws can come from the state or the federal level. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Can come from the state or the federal level, or they can come from, anyway, we don't need to get more complicated than that. Fixtures are anything that normally would be considered personal property, but something has happened to make it be treated as real property. If there's ever a dispute and a judge needs to figure out, is it real property or personal property, he's going to look at annexation, adaptation, and intention. So that is it for lecture 1. As I said, I'm going to try and do an activity with you that will help you see the difference between real property, personal property, and fixtures. And I hope that this wasn't too complicated for you, but tune in for the next lecture, and all right, we'll see you later.